It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker for tonight, Dr. Claude Chapdelaine. He's currently a professor emeritus at the Université de Montréal. Dr. Chapdelaine has had so many, academic accomplishments that I find it hardly know where to begin to introduce him. After a degree in history at the University of Ottawa, he went on to do a BA and MA at Montreal. And then he served as the director of their excavation lab for several years before going on to do his PhD at Montreal as well. And then, of course, he joined the faculty at Montreal and until his retirement from that. He has had a long and distinguished career. He was a visiting scholar at the University of East Anglia in the UK, and also at the the University Pablo Alavide in Spain. If I'm pronouncing that right, probably not. My French is bad enough. English is worse at that. He seems to have no limit on his work capabilities, his capacity for work. He's had a long career at Montreal. He supervised, I think, almost 70 graduate students. And if you can point out anyone else that supervised that many graduate students, I'd like to know all about that. But he basically has trained, you could say, a whole generation of Quebec archaeologists in the ins and outs of archaeology. He has also published almost 25 books. And again, you'd be hard pressed to find any Canadian academic in archaeology, I think, that's published that many books, and also as well as over 125 articles and book chapters. And he's also published in his book chapters and articles. His articles have been published in major journals like the Journal of Anthropological Archaeology, Antiquity, Latin American Antiquity, Geoarchaeology, and so on. I want to especially impresses me is the breadth of his scholarship and knowledge. Of course, he's obviously worked in Quebec, but he's also worked in both Central and South America, notably on the Moche civilization in Peru. Even within Quebec, I'm always impressed by the fact that he's worked on sites throughout the whole series of time periods that we recognize, starting obviously at the late woodland, even into the early historic era or the post-contact era, and going back all the way, of course, to the Paleo times, as he's going to talk about one of those sites tonight. In fact, Claude was the one who first discovered the first fluted point site in Quebec, as I recall, on that. And I think you've been working there lately, but anyway, that's on that. Anyway, I do know that it's great to have him here tonight to talk to us. And with all of his accomplishments, it doesn't surprise me that in 2019, he was awarded the Smith-Wintenberg Award from the Canadian Archaeological Association. That's an award that has been referred to as the Nobel Prize of Canadian Archaeology. So it's the top award that you can get. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce him and have him speak to us tonight about some of his paleo research at the Kruger 2 site. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Chapdelaine.
Right away. So with the title, Kruger 2 is the major site I will be presenting to you tonight. I will talk about other sites, but very, very briefly. So I'll stay with the late Paleoindian period in the Northeast and what the Kruger site can contribute. So the content is a typical one, biophysical setting and site description, the tool assemblage, the chronology, and then I will focus on 3 questions, and I hope that I won't take too much time, so that after reviewing these 3 questions, so that we can have some benefic exchange, because I'm starting with the biophysical setting. So it's maybe not the best map, because it was made more for the Clichérancourt site, so for the Paleoindian. Just look at the gray lines. These are the front of the glacier retreating from the south to the north. And so if you I don't know if you can see my mouse. So here, Kruger 2 is not affected 9,500 years ago by the glacier, because it was around here, so very, very north. But it is within the Saint Francois or Saint Francis River basin, just north of Sherbrooke. So that's to get a good location. And then regarding also the Paleoindians, since we all liked or we prefer or we were lucky at one point in our career to discover an early Paleoindian site, we were focusing on the tundra, not too far from the glacier, highly mobile hunters, and so that the exact scenario for the Cliche-Ranco site in the Megantic Lake area, because when it was occupied at least 12,000 years ago, there was still a tundra there. But now when you're talking about late Paleoindian period, you're talking about an area that was covered by a sugar maple forest. So it's a complete different environment. So we have to keep that in mind. And of course, all the work behind this diagram is the work of Pierre Richard, who is in his category high-class palynologist and geographer from my University of Montreal. So if we get closer to the site, so north of Sherbrooke, so Kruger 2 is located on a terrace 10 meters above the St. Francis River, and it is downstream from a series of small falls that you can see here and you can see here. And there's an hydroelectric barrage over there. So the site is strategically located downriver. And you have a map on the lower right side corner of the excavated area. So about the site, it's very unusual. So it's a terrace that is well above the river, but it's very narrow. So it's about 40 meters long by 20 meters wide. And the site or the occupation is located where there's a sand deposit. So you see the yellow contours. And so there's sand, there's an occupation. When you see the black square, these are negative test pits because there was no sand. And when there's no sand, there's a very thin black soil that is covering the bedrock. So the bedrock is visible on the site. But when you have a sand deposit, then you have an occupation. And Kruger 2, which is very unusual, it's a one component site. So there's no mixed assemblages of the woodland or archaic occupation. And we are not very far from the St. Francis River. It's 5 meters, 15 meters to the west. So you have a look at the stratigraphy of a standard unit, and so you see the succession. It's a podzol, and thickness of sand affect the vertical distribution. So every artifact was left on the surface, and with natural factors, and mostly probably cryoturbation. Very hard for me to say it in English. The ta and the other in French is gel et dégel. So, but the fact that the climate was still very cold, so very naturally the artifacts were pushed or were able to go down, and they reach a depth ranging between 60 and 80 centimeters. But the richest levels on the site are between 30 and 60 centimeters. What is also very unusual on this site is that we found 3 features. Feature one is a classical concentration of firecrack rock, and feature 2 and feature 3 could be considered as hearth, but you'll see that it's more problematic. So feature 1 is not very large, but it's the unique and only FCR, so firecrack rock concentration at the site. You have here a drawing of the multiple layers of rocks. Some are very big, some are very small. Most of them are cracked and with red color. But what was very interesting is that from my university, pedologist François Cochain analyzed samples of the spodic horizon from feature 1. And he found an abundance of smectite. I don't know what it is, but that's smectite is absent elsewhere on all the analyzed sample of spodic horizon that are not associated with this feature 1. And the hypothesis is that the presence of smectite may have developed from the original ashes of the fireplace. So that's a complement of information, because as archaeologists, a concentration of firecrack rock, that's sometimes enough. Also, I can add that we found 1 or 2 projectile points burnt by the fire within the feature, and but feature 2 and 3 are less evident. So feature 2 is a fossil remnant of a spodic horizon, what it's called AE on the left side figure, and it is associated with burnt soil. So already you don't have the right sequence, because usually the burnt soil will be below the spodic horizon. And but the surprise came with the analysis of the spodic soil, where François Cochain found also smectite. And on the last summer, Cochain came back and he decided to sample more spodic soil in different areas of the site. And in one area, he sampled what you see, the AE horizon, and it was also he detected the presence of smectite. But what was very impressing the pedologist is the quantity. It's the richest quantity of smectite. So it's an hypothesis that it is also a feature made by probably an anthropic human activity, like a small fireplace. But on both of these features 2 and 3, there's no rock, firecrack rock concentrations. So the tool assemblage, Kruger 2 is a very rich site, but as you will see in the following pictures, the complete specimens are quite rare. So, for example, there's 143 points. There's only 35 basal fragments. Most of the vast majority of the points are distal ends and medial portion of the, and it's the same with the drills. And it's also very particular about the 332 bifaces. We did a lot of mending. Don't know if there was only 250 or 200 bifaces, but most of them are evidently bifaces, but very fragmented. And for the other type of tools, there's only 23 end scrapers, 62 side scrapers, 12 retouched flakes, 92 utilized flakes, and 9 wedges. And there's one adds, and the last number that if you need flakes, you can call me. We have 199,000 and more flakes. And because we're crazy a little bit, and it's because, as you will learn later, that we found small piece of bone. So bone is very rare. So by doing a more precise screening, so we were able to collect micro debitage. So there's maybe 70,000 microflakes. But as you may know, within that microflake category, it always impressed me that there's a very, very large amount that are complete flakes. So they can tell you a lot of things, not because they are small, because they are complete. So let's have a look at the 6 complete or almost complete projectile points. So it's 6 out of 143 point specimen. So it's not a lot. And these are the 30 proximal fragments of projectile points. We also identified 14 point preforms, and also it's highly subjective, but because some may have never be transformed into a point, but and here are the drills. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You have 10 complete or almost complete drills, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 20 proximal ends, but a lot of distal ends. So they were used on the site and discarded. So it's the surprise comes from the large number of specimens. Bifaces, also the same situation. Very few bifaces were left behind complete or almost complete. And there are various size. And I always like to recall the article by Robert Kelly, The 3 Sides of a Biface. So the 2 large bifaces at the bottom are a clear example. They are made of New Hampshire rhyolite. So they were very important for these people. So they brought them here at Kruger 2, and they left them. I don't know why. Maybe the specimen on the right maybe was broken intentionally, but hard to say. But they are definitely from New Hampshire, and it's a rare lithic source at Kruger 2. 2 end scrapers. I selected them because they are very similar to the large end scrapers I found at the Rimouski site. So we can make a geographic link over a long distance. So the one on top is made of a brown jasper and a black chert at the second. And you can see that there's some retouch on the ventral face of the black shirt end scrapers, and not really on the brown jasper. A lot of side scrapers, but I selected just to tell you how curious these people are. Sometimes they use all kinds of lithic sources, but I'm showing you the side scrapers made of red mudstone. Usually we don't think that it's the good, but to scrape salmon could be strong enough, and so it's an important category at the site. And one adze or axe, more than adze, very small. There's very, very few. We have one at one site in the Gaspé Peninsula. There's one. There's maybe some at other places. So it's not unusual, but again, it's very, very low in number, 1 per site if you're lucky. So at the site, we identified with the help of Adrian Burke several lithic sources. So the dominant lithic source comes from the Mount Kineo area. So it's like an exotic. The second exotic source, we discovered it at the Gaudreau site, which is here, and it was the first time we encountered that second material. And in Vermont, they discover a possible quarry, and on a site, I think, is not associated clearly with the Paleoindian, but at Weybridge. So that the same material as we found at Clichanco, at Kruger 2, was found in Vermont. So maybe this source was used, or another unknown source. And Adrian found a red mudstone quarry about 35 kilometers north of Kruger 2. And it's a high quality mudstone, and it was probably used for some of the scrapers I showed you, and some of the nice bifaces that were left on the site that are complete. So, and the other important source that is very ugly when you see it, because it altered dramatically over the 1,000 years, and it's the Ornfells. So Adrian believes that there's a regional source not identified. There's some beds not too far from Kruger at a small village called Scottstown, but there's a huge source at Mount Shepherd. But Adrian went there, and he found the material, but not a quarry. And there's a very important source of Ornfells on the Mont-Royal in Montreal. So, but we think that it's too far. That quarry, it's too far because it's not it was probably originally a very good material. That's why they selected it, because they tried to make projectile points, drills, bifaces. But what we have in front of us are very highly deteriorated by the soil conditions. And also Mount Jasper or Jefferson, sometimes it's difficult to distinguish these two. So that's why in Quebec we always say New Hampshire rhyolite. So it was also identified. And the last, but not the least, but very, very small number, the Cheshire quartzite. That is quite distinctive. So Adrian was pretty sure about these identifications. At the site, there's also a big surprise was waiting for us. So after the first 2 or 3 field seasons, we had probably 5, 6 burned bones, and so we were not digging at the right place, I guess. But at the end, after 6 years of field work, we uncovered almost 10,000 burned bones. But as I said, we are crazy people, so we were doing our best to recover almost everything. So we even did a kind of water flotation, that it's not a real flotation, but we did our best to recover all the small pieces during the field, in the lab, after keeping soil samples, and also recuperating several micro débitage. But if you can look at the tables, you'll see that almost everything is unidentified. There's more than 6,000 that we can say nothing. There's about 3,000 and more of mammals, but within the identified species, we have very, very little success. But it's interesting because we found the first fish bones in Quebec associated with the late Paleoindian, and they were able to identify one sturgeon. So that's great. We have also identified turtles, 2 birds, 120 beavers, and so that's the most abundant. All kinds of rodents, muskrat, woodchuck. One could be dog or wolf, and 4 black bear. Only 1 cervid, so that was a surprise. We thought that the white-tailed deer must have been privileged, but there's 148 big mammals. So in the big mammals could be some cervids, but could also be bear. But again, I think that's a very interesting contribution of the Kruger 2 regarding the fauna. Also, what is interesting, and you'll see with the next slide, the spatial distribution. So I told you from the beginning that the human occupation is associated very tightly to the sand deposit. There's no sand, there's no artifacts, but within the 3 areas that are rich in artifacts. So in the center, it's area number 3. At the southwest, it's area number 2, and north of area number 3, there's area number 4 that is very small but very, very rich. So the bone are concentrated in one place. It's quite evident. So it's along very near the feature number 1. So east of feature number 1. And there's a small concentration below feature number 1, and very, very rare in other areas. And if you look at the larger windows for sector 3, that almost all the identified species were found in sector 3, but there's a beaver also in sector 2. So that's interesting. And if you keep in mind the distribution of the fauna, so for the débitage, you have the same pattern. So a big midden east of feature 1. But here, what is different, see, that you have a second midden, but I prefer to say that it's a workshop below, just south of feature 2. So giving some importance to feature 2 with the burn soil and the spodic horizon that is not in the right location within the sequence of layers. And the tool distribution, again, resembling the débitage, it's more present all over the area, but it's showing the same clusters. And now the chronology, types and radiocarbon dating. So before presenting the C14 dates from Kruger 2, just complementary data from 2 sites, Kruger 3, that is below Kruger 2. It's 5 meters lower, and it's much smaller, but it's in the same area. So it's a multi-component site. So you have 150 centimeter deposit. So on top, as usual, you have the woodland horizon, then late archaic, terminal and late archaic, middle archaic, and then the late late Paleoindian. What is interesting about the late Paleoindian, it's the projectile point that was found at a depth of 120 and 130 centimeters. It's made of a greenish chert. Edinburgh think that it might comes from the west, so maybe New York State, maybe Western Ontario. I look in the literature and I was not able to find a similar artifact. The bays are quite flat. The notches are look like Otter Creek, but they are and probably it's a reworked point. Probably the blade was longer, but it was retouched, and so I think that's more an early archaic. If it's something, but for me, it's an unknown type, except that we can say that it's a side notch projectile point, but it's found within a Paleoindian, late Paleoindian context. And on your right, you see the feature 7. That was the biggest. It's about 70 centimeter long by about 35, 40 meters wide at the maximum. And 3 AMS dates were obtained from feature 7. And there's another similar feature, much smaller, where we had an additional AMS date. The 4 dates are coherent within them, and the average is 9,350 cal BP. The second site where there's no projectile point, it's called Cascade Tree at East Angus. So it's where it's on the line with the red line. So not too far from the Kruger 2 and Kruger 3 sites. Still along the St. Francis River. And we're lucky, another very small feature provided a date of 10,215 cal BP. But on that site, we found 2 drills. One is complete, made of kineo-felsite. The other one on the right is made of hornfels. On the lower slide, on your left, 2 fragments of kineo bifaces and a very large biface, a pointed biface, and you can see how the surface seems to be very damaged, or and that's the reality of hornfels in that region of southern Quebec. So it's a very large biface. So I will deal with that table later, but just to tell you that at Kruger 2, we found we had a burn bone that was dated to about the same time interval, 9,258, and the 2 other date, 9,000 to 10,400, comes from optical stimulating dating. Formerly thermoluminescence, now it's luminescence, optical luminescence. And you have the all the dates from Kruger tree and the dates from Cascade tree. So I'll come back later to this. So the first question is about typology and chronology. So the types of point, I think we can debate on these, especially the first one. So the Agate Basin. So it's sometimes called Agate Basin like, or like in Ontario for a long time, only lanceolate projectile point. The St. Anne Varney, called also St. Anne in Quebec, and Eden west of the Great Lakes. And there's some variants where you can place them in between or put them aside in any discussion. So Agate Basin points or lanceolate points. Here are the specimens that were considered good candidates. Some seems more alike than others. The St. Anne Varney present less problem for their identification. The base is always square. The parallel flaking is what their basic intention, and the blade are with parallel sides. So the late Paleoindian chronological framework for the far northeast, so based on Bradley and Al and Lothrop and Al, Agate Basin is, these are propositions, 11,600 to 10,800 cal BP. Another interval for Saint-Anne-Varney, and for myself being a kind of a small black sheep, I think Agate Basin, I changed my mind over time, and I'm still changing it for tonight. So I thought that 11,400 was a better guess, and as it seems to be accepted, maybe, I don't know, that the Saint-Anne-Varney may have lasted longer than 10,000 cal BP, and we can extend it to 9,500 and even at 9,000 cal BP. So the question, these two sites could be coeval on the same site, because the problem is very simple. If we accept the Agate Basin type at Kruger 2, we have these two types on the same site. And so I made some analysis of their behaviors. So I looked first at the raw material diversity, and I found out that even if there's more Saint-Anne-Varney than Agate Basin type, the same raw material are used to make the two types, but the Kineo-rhyolite is more popular to make. So it's a slight difference, but it's not enough. So looking at the horizontal distribution, so first Agate Basin points where they were found on the site, and then you had the Saint-Anne-Varney. And so when you make a table out of these distributions, so they are present in the almost in the same percentage in each area, and there's no projectile points in area 1 and 5. So the horizontal distribution indicates that the two types are present in all three areas of the site and more common in area 3. So again, not a definitive answer. And the relative depth of the two types of points. So 50% of Agate Basin points were found below 30 centimeters and 47 for the Saint-Anne-Varney points. So in a normal expected distribution, we should have found the Agate Basin much deeper than the Saint-Anne-Varney, since we're talking about a natural process. So the first points left on the ground will have better chance to go deeper than the ones that are left maybe 500 or 1,000 years after. So the vertical distribution is not allowing us to distinguish a pattern for each type of point to support two distinct phases. So regarding the other sites known for the late Paleoindian sites in the Eastern Township, so the number are 6. So there's sites with radiocarbon dates, so Kruger 2, Kruger 3, and Cascade 3, but only Kruger 2 of these radiocarbon site have projectile points. So sites with Agate Basin and Saint-Anne-Varney points only Kruger 2, so it's the unique site with that mix. And sites with Agate Basin, Kruger 2, Fortier is right here, and Clichancourt, it's here. And sites with Saint-Anne-Varney, you have Kruger 2 and Gaudreau. Gaudreau is right in front of Fortier. So when you have to link these patterns, this is what we have. So with the Kineo-rhyolite, you have, and with the Agate Basin, you have Clichancourt, Fortier, and Kruger 2. and with the Whedon rhyolite that may come from southern Vermont, the Weybridge locality. So there's a link between Gaudreau and Kruger too. Well, that's not that's interesting, but it's not enough to break the data into two very clearly distinct phases. So revisiting the late Paleoindian chronological framework. So now I'm revisiting Quebec evidence for you tonight. So right now what I'm proposing is Agate Basin, if it exists, it's much later. So let's say 10,600 Cal BP, probably ended before 10,200 Cal BP. And the Saint-Anne-Varney started much later, let's say 10,200 to 9,000 Cal BP. So I'm challenging the orthodoxy here. So the consequence is I'm provoking a 1,000 year hiatus or empty area between the end of the fluted point era and the beginning of the late Paleoindian period. So let's continue. So, for example, if we don't have time to look carefully at all the dates, but I'm summarizing it for you. So there's no date on that table before 10,800 Cal BP for Agate Basin point type and the early phase. So we're still waiting for a good association with an Agate Basin site and a radiocarbon date. Of these dates, 19 dates ranges between 9,000 and 9,700 Cal BP for the Saint-Anne-Varney point type and which is considered a late phase. And there's only two dates that are fitting the standard chronology. That's the date from Cascade 3, 10,190. That's an AMS date. And the 10,578 Cal BP date from Varney Farm, but that's the first date that was obtained with the standard procedure. Well, we know that when you look at the other dates, they are all fitting within the 9,000 and 9,700 Cal BP for the Saint-Anne-Varney point. So I'm near the end. So the second question, two phases for the late Paleoindian in the far northeast. So I'm not making nightmares, but that's challenging me over the last 4 years now. So data from the Eastern Township. So no clear answer from Kruger 2, excuse me. So no C14 date associated to a specific point type, no horizontal cluster, no vertical separation, no distinct use of a lithic source. One question remains, the points attributed to the Agate Basin type, are they truly of that Western type or knives with a lanceolate outline? One potential answer is to do a use-where analysis of these points. The dilemma, rejecting Agate Basin type means deleting the early phase of the late Paleoindian period. My proposition, keep the early phase with a 1,000 years hiatus. But Kruger 2 is not alone. So while digging the Quebec literature, so I returned to the Gaspé Peninsula, where there's a very impressive cluster of late Paleoindian sites. Most of them were investigated by José Benouillal, who did his PhD at Simon Fraser, 1979. It's available on the internet, but it's dated 1981. And he did a French publication in 1987. So there's 7 sites where there's a mix of Agate Basin, like, and Saint-Anne-Varney projectile points. And all these sites, there's no no element to consider the lithic collection as anything else than a single component. So data from the Gaspé Peninsula based on Ben Muyal. No clear answer from 7 sites with Agate Basin and Saint-Anne-Varney point types. No C14 date associated to a specific point type. No horizontal cluster, no vertical separation, no distinct use of a lithic source. I'm just telling you what Ben Muyal was telling us. But one point that is of interest to you guys about the Gaspé Peninsula data, one regional issue. Ben Muyal identified 3 types of projectile points. The first type, he called them plano. And later on, he named them Saint-Anne. That became the Saint-Anne-Varney projectile type. And also the diamond-shaped points. And a third category that was of no interest to Ben Muyal, he called them lanceolate projectile points. But the diamond shape are part of that lanceolate group. But that was attractive to Ben Muyal. And when I reviewed the literature this spring and summer, so I convinced myself that some of the diamond-shaped points from the Gaspé Peninsula resemble the Medina El Gap points. Not very clearly, but I'll show you them. I'll show you soon. So one typological question, and that's a very big one. The lanceolate points as Agate Basin related points. If you say yes, are they the lanceolate? Let me rephrase it. If the lanceolate points of Ben Muyal's collections are Agate Basin related point, we have a problem because they are in large number in Ben Muyal's collection. Because these are big collections. So I spent an afternoon photographing only some lanceolate, almost complete point, and the diamond shape. There's 11 diamond shaped point identified clearly by Ben Muyal. So I was interested in reviewing his type because I found some relations with the Medina El Gap point. So it's quite interesting, but somebody will have to go back at Quebec City and do the work on these large number. And as it is often the case, most of these very nice lanceolate point, we don't have the proximal fragment. Very few complete lanceolate points. So the dilemma with the Gaspé Peninsula data, if you reject the Agate Basin El Gap types, means deleting the early phase in the easternmost cluster of sites. That could be easy because they are far away from, let's say, the Eastern Township, but it's an impressive cluster, let me tell you that. My proposition, don't forget the Gaspé Peninsula data, so integrate it in the chronological and cultural debate. And now, just for you, a glimpse at these diamond-shaped points. Yeah, the 11 points. So what first was striking me is the variety in size. So there's specimens that are quite long, some are quite small, but Ben Muyal considered them as projectile point, except specimen C and D. So I put them there. He wrote that for him he considered them as diamond shape, but preforms. So that's why I always use to make a photo on both sides to be sure that it's a similar pattern or the point is not well finished. And most of these diamond shape, the base is grounded. And that was also noted by Benmouillard. And the less attractive lanceolate. So, for example, if telling you specimen B, specimen H, I may be wrong, but there's at least 50 specimens alike these two in the 7 sites I looked at a few weeks ago in Quebec City. And on the lower right side, the specimen K and L are 2 stem bifaces, so they are not considered point by Benmouillard, and he was quite right. But they are the only 2 stem bifaces in his entire collection, and we're talking about more than 600 or 800 bifaces from these sites. Now, the sites in the Gaspé Peninsula are rich. They are almost near quarries, so near the source. So for the continental perspective, so that's what I published in 2020 in the book on the Kruger 2 site. But I made some adjustments. So I changed to put hiatus on the Quebec Eastern Township and Gaspé Peninsula columns. But let's say that Varney Farm late dates fit with the current revision of extending the late phase of the late Paleoindian to 9,000 call BP. Cascade 3 from Quebec is the oldest for the late Paleoindian period in Quebec. And the Varney Farm old date, if you accept it, is just okay to support the chronology of the late Saint Anne Varney phase. There's no support for the Agate Basin early phase, let's say in Quebec, or let's say east of the Great Lakes. So just to end my talk, because I want to show the last nice thing that Pierre Richard did for me back in 2020. So the third question is population movement and how many waves, following trails and potential dead ends. So just to give you my conception, I think there was 4 waves. I thought there was 3, but now I'm convinced that there was 4 waves. So the waves are population movement from the west to the east is represented by Agate Basin. The second wave that I call Cody complex, but I could have called it the Scottsbluff point type, because it's represented by only the Scottsbluff point type, while in the Western Plains, Scottsbluff and Eden are almost always found together, but it's not the case in our area. And the third wave, the Cody complex, but with the Eden point type, with no Scottsbluff point appearing anywhere. And the fourth wave, it's the I lack imagination sometimes. So the late Plateau complex, represented by the Angostura, Jimmy Allen, and Frederick point types. So let's have a look at the nice map that was produced by Pierre Richard with all my crazy notes that I sent to him to have a kind of not a continental perspective, but at least including Ontario and the far northeast and the larger northeast. So as you can see, the brown arrows are the migration by people having in their as their principal projectile point the Agate Basin. And so I think that the trail is strong west of the Great Lakes. So you see the brown arrow are thicker, but it seems to be lost somewhere in Eastern Ontario and New York. So that's a possible first dead end. So what I mean by dead end is you have to keep in mind that I'm trying to understand Kruger 2. So they are not coming to Kruger 2, except they are passing along a very large territory without leaving any trace. So that's why I call it the first dead end. The Cody complex in red, so represented mostly by the Scottsbluff projectile point, is a second dead end because it seems clearer that east of the Great Lakes, it disappears almost totally. Of course, new discoveries could prove me wrong, and I will be very pleased because we need more late Paleoindian site. And then the Saint-Anne-Varney or Eden Trail is very weak east of the Great Lakes, west of the Great Lakes. So look west of Lake Michigan. Send me what you know about Eden Points, where they found Agate Basin and Scottsbluff. So if you found some, it will be very little. So it's very weak west of the Great Lakes and limited in Eastern Ontario and New York. So how to link Varney Farm and Kruger 2 sites within the same trail. So Varney Farm is here, number 14. And Kruger is right here, number 1. So I think there's no dead end because I want to be optimistic, but we have a large gap to fill. And the last wave, so the late Plano. So for the moment, it's concentrated in northwestern Ontario with sites along the Thunder Bay area with the famous Mackenzie 1 sites with hundreds and hundreds of projectile points. Very impressive. So regarding the late Plano, a single projectile point from Kruger has the oblique parallel flaking and a slightly concave base. So I don't think it's enough to say that there's a late Plano occupation at Kruger 2, but at least we have one specimen that looks alike. But the conclusion is all the trails are hard to follow from the Great Lakes to the far northeast. The dilemma about Agate Basin type and the early phase of the late Paleoindian period is still a subject for debate among us. Our grocery list is long. Answers must come from Southern Ontario and New York. Waiting for Agate Basin stratified site with C14 dates and nice projectile points, and I'm still dreaming and dreaming and dreaming. So as a conclusion, the Paleoindian period needs much more attention. That period was unknown in the St. Francis River Valley before 2010. So I'm pretty sure there's sites that will be discovered, I hope, in the near future. Before I die, I hope. Kruger 2 contribution, site setting on a low terrace. Because, well, before we were always looking for higher terraces, but they are not that high. New adaptation to a forested environment, large tool connection and debitage, use of local sources as well as exotic sources, generalist hunters and fishermen. Kruger 2, more than a carrying place, a base camp, several visits over how many generations? Basic questions remain open. Relevance of the Agate Basin point type, chronological assessment of Agate Basin point type, existence of an early phase for that late Paleoindian period in the far northeast. Eden transition into Saint-Anne-Varney needs much more attention. What trail was used by the Kruger 2 inhabitants? The St. Lawrence River Valley or the interior New England route? Thank you very much for your attention.